It is Friday, April 20th. Let's talk PlayStation. You'll have to excuse the fact that the lighting looks entirely different. This is actually because I have to record this episode a little bit early just based on my schedule, so I'm hoping that nothing too crazy happens in terms of news, and then I gotta do one of those post-edit add-in things, so hopefully these are all the news stories that we do have to talk about, but it is early in the morning, and that's why natural light is coming in. I often record very, very late. But happy God of War Day, the game's out, so good lord, I cannot wait to pick it up later and finally have some time to play with the game. But anyway, let's get into our first news story. It's a PS5 news story, but kind of a quick one. This is coming from Eurogamer. They apparently have details and sources confirming that Mark Cerny, the lead architect from the PlayStation 4, is currently on the road speaking to publishers and developers about the next generation of PlayStation hardware, presumably PlayStation 5. Now, this is this is one of those things where it's like, it's totally believable. This could certainly happen, as we've been saying already with a few of these PS5 news stories, where it's like, even if, you know, some things that we're hearing are false or not true, on some surface level detail, there's definitely some truth to the fact that Sony is working on the next generation of their hardware, which they have probably started a very long time ago in a very small amount of people working on it, and in very early R&D. Like, this typically happens a year to 2 years after a brand new hardware launch. So this process easily started years ago, but the fact that we're getting more and more details about it tells us that we're gearing up for a possible launch in 2019, 2020. And if you remember, at least in the initial roundup of PS4 pre-release hype and discussion and news and you know, rumors and all those things, we had already, actually, and Sony even revealed when they announced PlayStation 4, is that one key factor they did with PS4 was talk to many developers and publishers and ask them what they wanted out of the next PlayStation. And at that time, a lot of developers famously said, you know, we want more RAM, please go with 8 gigabytes, please go with the high-speed memory. And that's what shocked a lot of developers when Sony did end up revealing PlayStation 4, and Sony announced that they went with 8 gigabytes GDDR5. And a lot of people, and this was a little famous thing where Randy Pitchford, I believe at the time, from Gearbox, had told Sony behind closed doors and in private conversations that if you guys go with 4 gigabytes, you're pretty much done. Implying that developers need more memory and they need more tools to make a lot of the games that they plan on making in the future. And ultimately, Sony went with the right decision. And I think their basic approach to PS4 is one of the many reasons why PS4 is doing so well, is because it's very developer friendly, and it's exactly what developers wanted. They focus that hardware directly around developers, and unsurprisingly, this is probably going to be no different with the next generation of PlayStation. Mark Cerny probably talking to many developers, asking them, what do you want to see? What would be best for you guys moving forward when you're going to be working on next generation hardware? But moving on to our next news story, somebody asking the PlayStation Spain Twitter account if they could buy a PlayStation Vita, because apparently they were having a hard time finding one. The PlayStation Spain Twitter account replied, yes, it is discontinued currently, or something along those lines. Which is kind of what we were expecting moving forward. I mean, we either, you know, shipments of the system has stopped in certain territories, but it hasn't, you know, hit major markets just yet, and that's kind of something I'm thinking might happen very soon. I think that was one of my predictions when this year started, which is that 2018 is probably going to be the end of the year for complete manufacturing for PlayStation Vita and PlayStation 3. So seeing something like this possibly happen for a territory that's quite large, you know, it's not the US or Japan or anything certainly, but it's a much more sizable market than I believe. I think they stopped shipping Vitas to New Zealand too. That was the most recent one, or maybe that was PlayStation 3. I don't remember offhand, but you know, Vita certainly is not being restocked in many locations now, and so this is just another nail in that coffin. So at this point, I'm certainly expecting a news story of Sony Interactive entirely finally announcing manufacturing has ceased, and all shipments that are being, you know, everything that's in retail basically is what's left. Alright, moving on to some PlayStation VR news. Apparently at GDC recently, Sony gave a presentation about some live streaming features that they're trying to add to PlayStation VR, because, of course, live streaming in VR is not really the easiest and most intuitive thing. You can certainly do it, but Sony's working on a few ways to make that easier, a little bit better for the viewer, and a little bit better for the live streamer. Now, they did mention that apparently they're testing this with a current demo, but as it stands right now, these are not features that they have on the PlayStation VR roadmap. possibly because the current hardware just doesn't allow this feasibly to work quite well. So it may be something that we'd see long term on maybe next generation hardware, maybe on whatever PSVR is going to look like on a possible PS5 or something. But some ideas that they are working on: a producer on the couch mode, which basically lets a second user command the stream more easily and more promptly. Another situation they're trying to do is actually add a full 3D camera perspective for the viewers. So as the person playing in VR, of course, you're playing the game naturally, but the person viewing the live stream can actually view a 360-degree view of everything and possibly things that you're not seeing as you're playing the game, which I find to be actually a pretty interesting idea. That would probably work quite well for a lot of specific titles that maybe, you know, you could possibly design an entire game around that concept, which is something that certainly excites me. What's interesting is that Sony is focusing on something like live streaming. Like, they know it's they know it's an important place for a lot of people nowadays, and they know it's important for, I mean, just the kind of culture that we live in right now, right? Where Twitch is getting bigger and bigger. Even YouTube live streaming is getting big, right? People more often are watching live streams, engaging in live streams, and it's just kind of where we're going, right? And so Sony understands that, and they want to take an emerging technology like VR and make sure it's even easier to do that with something like live streaming. So, in a video interview with Skill Up, God of War director Cory Barlog was talking a little bit about if he were to do his next game, right, he would actually want to do an entirely new IP. And he said this because he wants an idea that's finally fleshed out directly from him, and he wants to, you know, I mean, as a game director, as a creative type, I think it goes without saying, but a lot of these guys want to do their own original idea, their own new IP. And he even jokingly said that this was something that he'd basically have to get Sony to get behind, and if Sony approves it and, you know, gives them like the funding and all that, he would totally be down to do something like this. I thought it was interesting because as it stands right now, God of War has reviewed so well. It is now the highest rated PS4 game. And granted, this is day one of the game being out, and a lot of people haven't gotten to play the game from start to finish, but given how critically acclaimed the game has done, you gotta figure the guy probably knows you know, a thing or two, and he's been in the industry for a long time. You know, this isn't Cory's first game, certainly. This ain't his first rodeo, but it's always nice to see creative visionaries like Cory really, you know, come into their own, because it seems like God of War is going to do quite well for Sony, and it's going to do quite well for a lot of people that play that game. And so this, you know, God of War is an established IP. I would love to see Cory do his own thing. When you've got a guy that can create such a, you know, masterful experience from start to finish, you definitely want to see them try and flesh out their ideas a little bit. And the thing is, Sony typically is very lenient with these things. I mean, yeah, they still hold the cash flow more or less. They still have to approve all these ideas. They have to greenlight everything and say it's okay. But, you know, many developers and small time indies and a lot of people have come forward and saying it's usually quite easy to work with Sony, and as long as you know, make a solid case for what you're trying to build and you believe in the project that you're trying to you know, release, they will back you 100%, and they usually give you some pretty easy creative freedom, which is, I think, one of the best ways to approach it, really, because you definitely don't want some big corporate, you know, like the big corporate people breathing down your neck to hit these deadlines and all that, and then, oh, guess what, you need to pigeonhole this feature in, you need to, you know, take out this character so-and-so, or, you know, this mode's too ambitious, take this out. And I'm not saying, like, those things don't happen, and I'm not saying they don't happen with Sony. I'm more than certain those things definitely happen quite frequently with Sony, but from what we see, at least, it looks like Sony's a little more lenient on those things, and they're a little more cooperative and understanding with helping people, you know, from start to finish with releasing their games. And I would love to see Cory do something for sure. So for our final news story, this was discovered by the Recent Era forum users. This was a great find by them, but it's a job listing for gameplay engineer in San Diego. Now this listing is in collaboration. You'll be working closely with the Visual Arts Service Group, which is the Sony team that handles a lot of motion capture for a lot of Sony's worldwide first-party studios. So they've done, you know, major games like Uncharted, God of War, and many others, right? What's more interesting is that that this job listing says you're going to be working directly with a major Sony first-party studio, and adding more fuel to this fire is that there is some LinkedIn profiles from some Naughty Dog employees listing an unannounced project, and it's a third-person action-adventure game. So this may very well be an unannounced title that Sony's building an entirely new studio for, or an entirely new team for. And we have an idea of the possible genre, and we know that they'd be working closely with Naughty Dog. This is definitely a Sony-owned IP, more than likely. Very early in the speculation, of course, but hey, a new game. And what's, I guess, maybe the jumping-off point from this conversation is, well, if they're going to be starting a, AAA big-budget game today, would it release on PS4, or would it be for PlayStation 5? Because starting a big-budget game today, and we know that, Sony can certainly take many years to develop some of these games. Maybe a PS5 game, you don't know. All right, but those are some of the news stories that I want to talk about with you guys this week. So obviously, we only did one video. It was on Monday. That was my embarrassing trophy story, where I tell you guys how the rarest PSN trophy I actually have is from Singing Never Gonna Give You Up. Actually, but there's many other trophy stories in that video. I implore you to check that out, and please share stuff with me too, because honestly, I love reading a lot of the stuff that you guys tell me. And this may be the same situation next week. We may do only a Monday video, but as always, follow on Twitter at Mystic Ryan. I'll always keep you guys posted, and you'll just listen to my typical bullshit that I often spew on Twitter. And that's pretty much it. Oh, and just another mention, because I mention it like every 3 to 4 months, maybe, but we do have a Let's Talk PlayStation community. If you haven't found it or you're not a part of it, go to my PSN at Mystic Ryan, or not at Mystic. Well, no, that's my Twitter handle. No, PSN Mystic Moon, and I naturally want to say the @ symbol. PSN Mystic Moon. And you can scroll down, you can find the community there. I think you can also search communities now, if I'm not mistaken. But it's just Let's Talk PlayStation. We got about 1,800 people in there. A lot of people sharing platinum trophies, just talking around, stuff like that. Cool community. I always like to shout that out every once in a while. Anyway, that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Badecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you guys next Friday.